Hello, my name is Jordan Sly, and I'm the Research and Instruction Librarian for Anthropology, Psychology, Philosophy, Digital Humanities, French, Italian, and German here at the University of Maryland Libraries. What this means for you is that I'm here to help you with your library research process. Library research is kind of a tricky thing, and it's simple at its outset and then complicated in its continued use. So I'm going to be going through some sort of basics of how to get started into all of this, but please know that I'm here to help you throughout your process, both in this course and in others. My email is jsly@umd.edu, and I'll show you as we get into the website another way of reaching me as well, where you can book an appointment with me directly. I'm available for appointments, and like most people, I'm doing these appointments virtually through Zoom. So if you book an appointment with me, we'll set up a time to do a Zoom call and work through your issues and problems with the research process. In this short video, we're going to be looking at some core ideas relating to library research. In order to really thoroughly and correctly conduct library research, you need to learn how to speak the library's language. This is difficult because the library is a complex organism with a lot of different materials, and it's probably a little bit unfortunately highly organized. When I say that, I mean things can get almost lost in the organization, particularly because the library has its own cataloging and classification system that doesn't use the natural language that we use to communicate ideas normally. This can mean that some things can get lost. So we're going to look at kind of how to work within that system to find material. We're going to look at searching, finding, and most importantly, accessing material. And accessing material during these weird times where we're not able to go through our normal methods to do that. We're going to look at issues of interlibrary loan, what that means now. We're going to look at some of the other sort of ad hoc access issues that we've had, or rather some new methods of accessing books and things. We're going to look at our curbside pickup, that kind of stuff. And we're going to look at that fairly quickly. Most of this is sort of trial and error more than anything. And importantly, we're going to also look at where to get further help, both from me and from others. Some topics may veer outside of areas that I'm particularly expert in and may need to hand you off to somebody in public health or something like this. That actually comes to one of the other central issues with a lot of this, which is exploring research topics in a sort of flexible, creative, and nimble way. Oftentimes, despite a sort of seating in one research discipline, such as anthropology, literature may come from other areas too. Again, public health is one that comes readily to mind if you're looking at sort of a medical anthropology topic. What we're going to be looking at primarily through a lot of this is how to take complex ideas and to make them simple. It doesn't mean that the notions are simple that are behind these, but they're more researchable, the sort of more isolated we can make them. And that's really one of the goals here, is while we're looking for connections between ideas, we're also looking for some depth in individual notions throughout our research topic. And I'll give an example of this here in just a moment. As we do this, we're also really trying to find the heart of the problem. And what I mean by that is essentially what are the elements that are even unsaid in our first draft of our research question, and how can we make them more explicit, but also more direct, right? What are the things that we're really looking for when we're putting together a research question? And is it possible that we're not communicating them properly, or even without communicating them properly, is it just not fully clear what it is we're trying to get to? Is our language a kind of barrier between what we mean and what we're saying? This is common, of course. So we're going to look at kind of breaking apart a research topic to make sure we're getting at what we're really trying to get at. And in the process of doing that, we're also going to be taking this complex idea and making it more researchable by pulling apart the central notions of that idea. Again, being flexible, creative, and nimble are really hallmarks of the sort of professional research process. Letting the research take you where the research goes is an important sort of lesson to this, and something I know you're going to discuss in your course. And that's not something we're going to be going into a whole lot today. We're not going to be doing a lot on actual sort of data literacy and things like this, as I think that is and statistical methods and things like that. I know that's a bigger part of this course. If you have questions about these things and want to talk to me about them further, I'm of course willing to do so. But for this particular video, we're really looking at library research materials. As a part of being flexible, creative, and nimble, we also want to work within a research plan, but be willing to adjust this plan as needs necessitate. The basic idea here is we want to work within a project management tool similar to something like the research cycle, which is something I advocate for. Now, the research cycle essentially takes you through a number of steps that puts research at a central point in your gathering process. Now, I'm using research somewhat interchangeably, and that's not quite correct. When you're doing your primary research, right, you know that's when you're going to be pulling together your actual data, the things that you're getting from people. What I'm referring to throughout this video when I shorthandedly say research primarily is library research, the background information and things. So I don't want to confuse, and I will kind of be throwing those terms around a little willy-nilly out of bad habits. But it's important to differentiate between those two. Now, with this project management tool, what this does is this takes us through our library research process in a way that allows us to kind of drill continually deeper into a research topic. So at a first blush, if I am to take a research topic, I'm going to need to kind of address the scope and the need of what I'm trying to do. What that simply means is what's the assignment, what is the requirements of an assignment, and what do I need to do? What are the parameters that I'm working within? I also need to consider my prior knowledge on this topic, and that essentially comes into why am I interested in this topic? Where am I getting my early information from? Where can I start pulling information? Do I already have some books on my shelf that are good for this? What can I do? Do I know of some articles and authors and so forth? And writing this stuff down, figuring out where you sit already with this. Then coming up with some research questions. I've heard some professors use a term called 5 questions, sort of copywritten term, 5 questions. And that essentially says come up with a topic and then ask 5 questions of it. I like that. I think that works fairly well. It's a little bit simplistic, but I think it's a good starting place because it allows you to dig further. And that's really where we're going with these next steps here. Looking into the heart of the problem, which is about, as I mentioned in the previous slide, really pulling apart why and what it is that you're looking for, and maybe reorganizing the language or your thoughts in order to best reflect what it is that you're directly looking for. It's not always easy to kind of, on your first go through of a topic, to best describe it the way you want to. Language can kind of get in the way sometimes. So looking at developing the heart of the problem and probably rephrasing it in order to kind of get more directly at what you're getting at, or maybe even to discover what it is that you're really getting at. And I think that's the example that I'm going to give here in just a moment. I think kind of highlights that notion about learning what it is that you're trying to find as you go. That's part of this whole nature of being a cycle, right? This is the research cycle on purpose. Library research is cyclical. And as you can see, as you go through this first third, this is about kind of trial and error and trying this early kind of hashing and bashing of finding some stuff. Then you move into this second third where you're at the reading, analyzing, and synthesizing stage. But by the time you get to that final third there, you're looking at kind of putting it into the research world and starting again, right? That's the important part about this. This isn't a sort of one and done kind of an idea. The idea is to put all of these ideas into context and play with them, and then also to dig and drill further into the research as you go. So the idea here is we have our first idea, we research it a little bit, we see what we learn about it, and then we start again with what we've learned. Each time we do it, our understanding of the topic will be more complex and more sophisticated. So by the time we've done this a few times, we're not in the same place we started, right? We have a more complete understanding of our topic, even if all we're doing is looking around at Wikipedia and related sites to kind of dig in a little bit further. that's better than not doing anything. So the idea here is to dig and dig and dig till you can build a more complete view and then start into the actual research process. One of the main reasons for using something like the research cycle is to build and develop keywords and words that you're going to use to search, to look for terms and signifiers, things that you are interested in that are derived from your topic, right? So to kind of take a larger topic and to pull things out of it that you're going to search for. As I'll show here in just a minute, one of the main goals is to be able to translate your larger research idea, the research question, into a series of keywords, right? Into a series of small isolated words that you can kind of rejoin using something like word math, right? And the idea here with this is to learn to speak the library's language. As I mentioned a few slides ago, library resources are highly organized and classified, and they use a sort of structured language and hierarchies of language that can be a little bit difficult to navigate at times. Systems are getting better at not always relying on this, but it's not a universal. Sometimes there are still some issues with this. So in other words, sometimes the library systems can help you and can kind of understand what you're saying, but oftentimes they're still reliant on kind of older classification systems and things that can make natural language searching very difficult, if not impossible. You'll get lucky and you'll fall backwards into stuff on occasion, but understanding how all of this is put together will really help as you learn to navigate the library. One of the main strategies that I often tell students to use is to start broadly. The impulse is to want to create sort of a killer search string right from the very beginning, and to dig straight in as far down as you can go to kind of drill into the minute areas of your research topic. And this is usually a mistake. It's not a mistake in terms of how to categorize your own research, but it may be a mistake in finding other people's. Using these sort of library hierarchies, we're at the whim of publishers and authors, and then other librarians, largely in sort of centralized locations, like the Library of Congress, for example, to come up with how a work should be best described. This isn't always the most accurate way a book can be described or other resource. You'll find countless versions of this with miscategorized books and things all over the place. I mean, even if you look in your own bookshelves and you look in the first page or so, you usually have the Library of Congress classification descriptions of the book, and you'll find it usually didn't describe the book hardly at all. So it's, sometimes it can be a little misleading. Keywords, which are our sort of more nimble structure that we use, are often a better way to categorize materials because they're developed by the author themselves. A journal article, for example, will ask the author, to write their article, however many words, then a shorter version in the abstract of like 150 words, and then even shorter in about 5 keywords. And the benefit there is that each one of these is a distillation of the larger research. So the abstract is sort of what is most important about the article overall, the findings, aspects of the statistical significance, etc. And the keywords are going to be a more simplified version of all of that. And usually will include, for anthropologists, importantly, the studied group. And so it will have aspects of who is being studied and who is studying, and usually a geographic locator as well, if that's important. So again, starting broad, though, can help you kind of isolate in, and as I'll show you when we get to the actual website, which I do promise will happen, you'll see that you can then dig into the results in probably a more helpful way than searching for them. So if we start broad, as we go into our next slides here, we'll look at a research example, and then we'll start to put it together on the website. If we start a little bit broad into like online communities and radicalism and things like this, then we can start to piece together some of our other interesting ideas and things as we go. So to build slowly is what I'm trying to impart here. Don't try to dive in too deep too fast. Try to start broad and build and build and build as you go. Every time you add a keyword or a subject, you'll be eliminating things that you may not want to be eliminating right from the start. So I'll show you what that looks like in practice here in just a minute. Okay, so here we're going to work with a sample research question that we're going to build from, and we're going to use this as kind of our example to kind of go with and play around with a little bit as we get into the library. But first, let's look at some of our research cycle ideas here and start to play with the actual topic itself and maybe try to parse what is it that we're really looking for and where we're going to find it. And what we really are trying to do with this is to turn these big thoughts into something more digestible for the library system, right? Remember, it works within sort of a strict hierarchy and controlled vocabulary. So how do I translate this natural language into something that I can research in a library setting? Okay, so the first goal of this, or the first step in this rather, is to piece apart what are the terms that are most important. That's fairly easily done, right? Okay, so in this first part, in this research question, what is the role of women in the recent QAnon phenomenon, and in what ways are gender roles maintained, and in what ways are they upended in this movement? It's actually fairly straightforward to piece out what are the, sort of keywords in here. Okay, role of women, QAnon, gender roles stand out as kind of big linchpins of this whole idea, right? These are the things that if you put them together, role of women, QAnon, gender roles, things like that, we're going to be getting some search results right away if we search for these terms. But it's important to understand for our own construction here, are these the most important terms as they stand? If we look down at our research method, for example, we say that we're going to, in order to kind of look at this question, we're going to study the culture, language, signs, codes, and symbols that are commonly seen in the group's memes and other structured communications within the subreddit group QAnon Mamas. And then additionally, I'll solicit members of this group for a coded and structured interview. Well, now it's actually changing a little bit about what's most important, right? So we may have this larger question about gender roles in QAnon, but a little bit of this is altered in how we're going to focus. So what we would actually research here changes a little bit because it isn't just about gender roles in QAnon. It's also about things like memes, right? Well, this is part of this sort of cultural language, the signs and codes and symbols, the sort of semiotics of a group that creates their sort of structured language and their coded language within their own group, their in-speak, things like this. Okay, well, that's interesting in and of itself, but I'm also given this little bit too. Subreddit group. Okay, so now I know I'm looking at a platform, and I'm looking at how and why a platform is used in particular ways. Another thing that may be of interest too is the fact that I'm looking at QAnon Mamas. Okay, so from the very outset, this is a potentially gendered group, and we have this other component in there, not only of, maintain gender roles and roles of women and things like this, but we have this added element of mamas in there. And there's a whole world of sort of mama groups and platforming on other platforms having to do with mamas and things like this. How important is the fact that these QAnon members are also mamas? That actually is something that changes an awful lot about our group and how we're going to research this. Why? Well, now as I'm looking at potential research areas, I'm not really just looking at issues of QAnon as it stands, as its own thing. I'm not also just looking at gender roles of women and things like this in American culture. What I'm looking at has a lot more to do with online communities and gender roles, as well as things like conspiracy theory groups and radical online communities. I'm looking at a combination of right-wing extremism and also things like biblical millenarianism and doomsday cults. I'm looking at issues of memes and communications, things like this, but I'm also looking at the actual platform itself and how and why that's important. So really what I've done is I've taken a fairly simple idea and made it a lot more complicated in a good way. Because now what I can do is I can go through this sort of list and start to figure out what it is that I'm really thinking about with this, and put it maybe into a more complete research question that gets more to the heart of what I'm actually asking about. And maybe I'm looking at things having to do, for example, with mothers groups, and QAnon is a mothers group within this. And I'm actually saying, well, are there overlaps here with other things that having to do with, anti-vax or distrust of governments in various different ways? And is there actually more of an overlap here? And it actually has more to do with online communities and this particular group, and QAnon is sort of a tangent, or is QAnon the most important part of my research, and I want to kind of throw all of these other things into the mix? These are the questions that you start to kind of come up with and answer. But as you can see, there's a little bit more to some of these things. What's important about this also is the idea that each one of these research areas here, online communities, mothers, QAnon, as sort of the sub-brackets, each one of these is its own research area, something that then you can find its own literature on. Part of doing sort of library research is connecting the dots, but doing so from these sort of silos. So learning a lot about biblical millenarianism and doomsday cults, for example, and religious separatism, for example, and how that might, relate in some ways to some of these other ideas and how you can link them together. That's what's important for a good portion of library research, is finding the larger literatures and seeing where the connections sit. Again, going where the research takes you. Finding an article that is about conspiracy theories, mothering communities, and religious separatism and all that, you'll find that too. So a lot of times the overlap is also where things are very important, but not always from the beginning. Sometimes getting a larger understanding of the sort of semiotics of memes and things like that is an important step in understanding the sort of cultural linguistic elements of a group like an online Reddit group or something like this. This is a deep literature, especially having to do with platforming, and recent past 10 years or so. There's a lot of literature on these things. There won't be as much literature on QAnon specifically, for example, but there is literature out there, very recent literature, true, but there is quite a lot in a lot of different categories. And then if you're taking more of an ethnographic view of this and looking at kind of creating a survey to understand and study the motives of these groups, having an understanding of these other elements of the sort of memes, semiotics, and the aspects of communities, especially radical communities, and understanding a little bit about the sort of grooming and maintenance of these types of groups and things like this. The idea is same with doomsday cults and right-wing extremism and all of this. Having that also informs aspects of that battery, that survey that you'll be giving. So, also of importance too, is our sort of nimbleness in putting together these research ideas. This is looking a little bit crowded now, but the idea here is that now we can start to think about some of the sort of synonyms of these things as well, right? This is kind of a sketch. We have some ideas put down here, but now we're looking at some more specifics, and now we can look into sort of the synonyms of mothers groups and things like this, mommies, moms, mamas, etc. And all the different ways that they're categorized. And is there a political aspect to the language used there? Is mamas a different group than moms, etc.? What does the sort of linguistic elements of these really capture? And does that have a sort of related semiotic, sort of symbolism behind it? Is there more to the term mom versus mama than appears at first? Then if you throw that in, as you look back at QAnon and aspects of sort of gender roles and the roles of women and all of this, does that term, mamas, for example, conform with gender roles in ways that moms or mothers doesn't? Something like this. And within the structure of QAnon, for example, does that matter, right? Does the phrase QAnon mamas, in other words, mean something? As a disclaimer, I have no idea if this is a real subreddit group or anything about this. I'm just kind of exploring this idea. So if you go search for it and it's something atrocious, I didn't know. So that's my CYA for that. Okay, so now what we're going to do is look at the actual website and put some of these ideas into into effect. What we're not going to do is a full research process and try to find every aspect of this and go back through the research cycle and all of this. I think you can kind of take what I've said and put it into your own application from there. And a lot of this is kind of a fairly personal process, like how it works best for you. But what I will do is show you how to take some of the basic ideas that we came up with and find some material using it. We're going to look at how to find books and articles, and most importantly, how to sort of not only find them, but access them, during the pandemic and everything. There are a number of different ways to actually use the materials, even despite the pandemic. And depending on where you are located physically, you're able to come and pick stuff up using our curbside pickup and things like that. So there are a lot of options for finding materials and getting materials as well. We were more limited in last year, but now things are moving along fairly well in this regard. So you can keep that in mind. Now, when you normally go to this site here, it will pop up with a libchat prompt here, and what this means is it'll sort of bug you to enter a chat. And this is if you have any basic questions about the library or finding materials, something like that, you can ask. It's usually a student, an undergraduate student who's kind of on call there, and they'll be able to help you find some basics of what to go with and something like this, or you're looking for a particular title, that kind of thing. If you have a more in-depth research question, you'll want to contact the librarian associated with you. So for anthropology, that's me, and I'm happy to meet with you. Again, during these times, I'm doing it on Zoom. Normal times, I am in my office and happy to meet with you in person or still on Zoom or phone if that works better for you. The way you can find us, me and my colleagues, is to go to this help button and meet your subject specialist. And then click this button here. And the easiest way is to go to subject and then to scroll through the subjects. And again, depending on your topic, you may want to reach out to other librarians who can help you. So anthropology is me, and you'll find my contact, and this is my office if we're able to meet in the future. My email, again, jsly@umd.edu. You can call this number. I actually have access to my campus phone, so you can call this number if you need to talk to me. But you can go into either the anthropology tab itself or to my profile here. And you'll find my contact information, my goofy photo, as well as my research guides, which I'll show you a little bit more here in just a second. But most importantly, you can click this schedule a consultation button. What this will do when you click it is bring up a little calendar, and it will show you my available dates for the foreseeable future. And this is helpful because you're able to line your calendar with mine and just see, okay, actually, Tuesday the 9th, I have an appointment available at whatever time, and then you can come in. You can just select that, it'll drop it on my calendar, and I'll send you a Zoom link. It's a fairly simple process. So feel free to do that. Again, you're always welcome to email me as well. While I'm on the subject, I will also just show quickly the research guides. I have a couple of guides that may be of interest for you. Most importantly, I do have this anthropology guide, which has a lot of information on various different aspects of anthropology research. And this is kind of a primer that can be helpful for putting together sort of very basic things. But this is designed for all anthropology students, including undergraduates. So some of it might be a little bit basic and things. But I do have things like some database suggestions that might be helpful, some research methods, resources that are helpful, especially for your course now. Very importantly, if you're going to be doing different analyses, we have access to a lot of different software. So we have some R and powerful sort of analysis software for quantitative analysis. So we have various different sites here, programs and things. These will take you either to sort of standard pages to download it from the publisher of that software, or to the Terpware page where you can download it for free through University of Maryland. We also have quantitative analysis tools. In Vivo is one that I use a lot personally and can be of better help than some of the others. But we do have a lot of different things that you can use. Your professors will probably have a preference and direct you towards something, but here's a place to check. Additionally, I also have information about writing guides and citation management. Again, I personally use Mendeley as my citation bibliographic manager. I don't have it on this computer that I'm using now to show. It's on my personal computer. But what this does is create a list of all your citations and allows you to see it in kind of like an iTunes kind of way. And it allows you to very easily copy and paste citations, so you can format them for footnotes or endnotes or in-text citations, as well as your sort of works cited or bibliography, that sort of thing. And it makes life a little bit easier for some of that. And again, some very basic information about the aspects of anthropology publications and what the sort of benefits of different things are. And how to use them. So again, this is for a mixed audience. So if this stuff is already not needed for you, it's just there if you do need it. Okay. So we have a couple of different ways to find information on the University of Maryland library website. Again, it's lib.umd.edu. Our main search is right here, and we call this our WorldCat search. That's the provider of the search thing. You may also referred to in various different ways by different professors, but it's WorldCat or just the catalog. Depending on how long the professor's been here, they may call it various other things, but it doesn't particularly matter at the moment. And as it says find books, journals, articles, media, and more. This searches everything that the library has access to, both physically, electronically, and then also within our sort of wide network within the Big Ten and within sort of the research libraries world in general, which is great. But it can also be a little bit cumbersome as you will find millions or hundreds of thousands of of resources of varying relevance. One of the general ideas for library research is knowing where to search. And sometimes knowing where to search is more useful than knowing how to search. So I mentioned the sort of structured language of everything, and that's all true. But a bit of a jump into these things and working within these hierarchies is to actually go directly to sort of a contextualized version. So if I go to the databases, for example, and this is a bit of a step, so pay attention to what I do. So databases, browse database by type or subject. And this will bring up our whole listing of all of our databases within these subject areas. So if I go to anthropology, for example, and I go into either Anthrosource or anthropological literature, which I'm going to do the second one first. Need to log in here. Once you do that, you're now in one of the research databases, this one, anthropological literature. And the kind of trick here is, now that I'm within this group, everything that I search is contextualized within sort of anthropology research. Right? So whatever terms I use from here on out, they're contextualized in anthropology. So it's almost like adding a separate term. And it means that I can be a little bit simpler, right? So if I put in something like millennialism or millenarianism, and which is the sort of end of the world kind of thinking, and I want to do a little bit of understanding about what these groups are even about. So now that I'm within this, I can see that there's a few articles, not a ton, 137, not as many as I would expect. So this may not be my only search, my only take through a lot of this. I may think that there's another way of framing some of this, but what I want to show is a couple of other things here from the beginning. So if I go to PDF full text, this is about the access, how to actually get the information. If you have that button, that PDF button, you'll be able to access the article straight away and just be able to download it sorry, let me go back. You'll be able to download it, print it if you have a printer, that sort of thing. But you can save it directly. It's very simple. We have a couple of other methods of getting articles and things, and so I just want to point those out as well. If this article looks interesting and it doesn't have the PDF button, and you see this Find at UMD, that doesn't necessarily mean we don't have it. It just means that it's sort of listed a bit strangely. In this example, it looks like we don't actually have it, or if we do, we have it only in print, so it doesn't look like it's directly available. So I would do request item through interlibrary loan. When I do that, it's a very simple process to get to that thing. You just click through a couple of times, and you see it's already added in my what I need to actually request the article. The only thing that you really have to do is to select this when do you need it by, and you see you can do this little calendar. Now there's a little trick here. What they mean by this is if I selected I need it by tomorrow, it means they'll stop looking tomorrow. Basically, if you need it by tomorrow, we didn't get it by tomorrow, you're out of luck. I always then, even if I do need it tomorrow, I pump it up till like May, or a few weeks, few months ahead. If I know that I'm going to need it either this week or sometime this semester, I just keep it anytime within the semester they'll get it for me. Now, typically they get you the stuff within a couple of days. I've gotten things within like a few hours. It really just kind of depends on what it is and where they're getting it from and so forth. And I mentioned that there was a third option. So we looked at the PDF full text. We looked at the Find at UMD. The other one that you might see is something called linked full text. If you click on this, what'll happen is it'll just bring you to a different database where we have this article. A lot of times these articles are just found in different databases, both within anthropology and then also without. So if you're looking for something, again, in sort of medical anthropology, you may find some overlap in public health, for example. And so the article may be coming from a public health journal or something like that. It's fairly simple. And so that's the basic idea of accessing the articles and things. Now, there's a couple of other notions to discuss with this too, and fairly simply. One is actually getting stuff from offsite. So you saw that I had to log in order to get to the articles. That's easy enough. Another way to do this and to kind of have it ready to go is to use what we call the reload at UMCP button. So if you're back on the main website and you click on this reload button here, or search for reload, and then you click on this first link, you'll see this button here. And all you do is you just drag this up and put this in your bookmarks bar, which is just out of frame for this video. But you drag it up into your bookmarks bar. Then if you're out on the free web and you find a JSTOR link or something like this that looks particularly good, but it says you need to pay $39.95 in order to access the article, you can hit this reload button and it will bring you back through the campus login system, even though you're not on the library's website, and it will give you access to that article if we subscribe to it. So it's a good way if you're kind of searching through Google Scholar, just doing basic searching in Google, things like that, to find articles and to access them through the library. It's a fairly simple thing. Let me know if you need help with that. You can email me, of course, to get access if you need, but it's fairly simple to do. So I recommend just, as part of your, afternoon, just add that to your bookmarks bar and move along with that. Now, there are a couple other things about sort of access that are important. If we do a search here, for example, and we look in our catalog, I'll show you how to access books and things. So if we're in the main catalog, you'll see that we can do a couple of things. I mentioned a moment ago that a lot of times it's better to start broad and then narrow down. And that's kind of what we can do here. And you saw this in the database as well. If I can pull the results back quickly, you see that sometimes it's easier to kind of do a broad search. Here's millennialism. You can just start to pull other things in and narrow down. So if I go to the subjects, for example, I can start to really locate on some of the issues. It seems to be a lot of sort of issues of geographic as well as other related faults and cargo movements and things like this, which for my particular research are not what I'm looking at, I don't think. So what I want to do is just check these ones that seem a little bit more relevant, and that will remove a lot of literature that I don't need. And also help me kind of understand where it is that I'm going next. Same thing with this. If you know that you particularly are looking for books, for example, you can isolate and remove things or things not be of relevance. You may also want to remove certain date ranges with the literature. I tend not to do this until a later process, until I kind of understand the scope. But a lot of times more recent literature will also summarize a lot of the older literature. So that is another sort of consideration. So if you look first at something from the past 5 or 10 years, you may find sort of access points to some of the older literature through their discussions and things like this. You can also hone down by the creators and the subjects, all of these different elements here that can pull back visual language and audience and things. Now, it doesn't always, your search won't always get exactly what you're looking for. In WorldCat thinks it's smarter, that it will prioritize things that don't always kind of make sense. But we can see here, the first few results look pretty good. And I think while we did type women and right-wing extremism, and these aren't directly about that, chances are if I go to this book and I look at the description, I'm going to see in the sort of chapter listing elements of what I'm looking for. So it pulls, see, here we go. See, stuff like this looks good and looks like, well, you know what I mean by good, but it looks like it'll be relevant for what we're finding. For what we're looking for, rather. And so this book is pulling, when I do my big search, it's pulling from the sort of data of the book, the metadata, and aspects like the chapters, and sometimes even the full text of the book, depending on what the publisher has provided. So what that means is, if I want to look at this book, I probably should. It seems like it's actually going to be highly relevant. Luckily, this is an ebook. So if I go and follow the ebook link, it'll bring up, this one is from our ProQuest version. We have EBSCO and others, and you'll see they all look pretty much the same, similar idea. And you'll notice a couple of things right away. One, it'll give you the amount that you're able to download and the amount that you're able to read. You're able to read the whole book online without any real limitations, they say, but you're only able to download 37 pages. And really what you want to do, I think, is you want to do the print option, because what that does is you can print a chapter. And when I say print, it allows you to print as a PDF, so you can save it. So you don't have to print it as in a physical copy, but you can, if you download it, you can see here, it says, use any PDF software. This one doesn't expire. Some of them do. So you can download the whole book and you can read it offline, but you have to download an Adobe package to do it. And it expires. So any notes you put in the book, anything like that, will expire. And sometimes downloading chapters will expire as well. So this one doesn't have that, but sometimes they do. So just kind of keep these things in mind. Now, if we look at another book, like this one, on shelf in McKeldin Library, we're all off campus and things now, but you can still access this book by placing a request for a curbside pickup. So you can go to this request item button, and you can go through and select your affiliation, College Park, and you'll see this request, and all it's really asking for is you want to do this UMCP curbside pickup as your location. And next, and what will happen is, I'm not going to click this, but you confirm request, and it will send you an email, and you'll schedule an appointment to come and pick the book up. That's basically the idea here. So if you find books that you want, you can place a request and come pick them up. It's pretty much as simple as that. It's been working fairly well. So let me know if you have questions about that, and I'm happy to help. Other books that we may not have and things you can also do through interlibrary loan. That would be on sort of later pages, stuff that we don't have. You can also find stuff through interlibrary loan, and it works effectively the same way as the way I showed you with the articles. You find it in here, and it'll have a button that says "Request through interlibrary loan." Once you do that, it's pretty simple, and you can in fact it'll have this button here, "Request through interlibrary loan." It will add the information for you, and it's the same deal with the book, with the date rather for pickup. So please make sure that you bump the date out if you know that you're going to need it at some point, even if you need it by the 18th. Do it to the 28th or further. One thing I wanted to make sure to do was to also highlight a couple of tips and tricks for searching in the library that are important. One of which is to make sure that when you do a complex phrase search, which is something like this, where I have, see, which is right-wing radicalism, I'm essentially searching each one of those words independently. And so what it's doing essentially is adding an and in between each one of these words. And while that sort of grammatically makes sense, what it is largely doing is looking for each one of these words independently. So it's looking for stuff about right, and looking for stuff about wing, and looking for things about radicalism. In other words, if we do this search, we're going to get roughly what we're looking for in general, right? Okay, this is pretty good, but we're seeing kind of a mixture of these terms put together. This isn't bad, and the system is sort of doing its best, but one thing I can do to make it even better is to put the search into quotation marks. If I do that, I'm telling the system to look for this phrase specifically, right, as this phrase. So I want all of these words to follow in this exact order. You can see some of these things that will say like right radicalism and whatever. While that is what we're looking for, we're looking primarily for this this construction, and this will come across in different phrases in different ways differently. Some searches are going to be more reliant on an exact phrase, so that's what we're going to do here. If I do that search, you see the stuff that comes up right away is using that phrase, right-wing radicalism, explicitly and directly. So it's just a little bit different, right, than our other search. And that's still going to bring back sort of our other stuff too. So this means essentially that this term, right-wing radicalism, is used less frequently than other versions, like radical right, for example. So that just tells us a little bit about how to start learning this language. I also wanted to mention, once we're in a book's record, what we can learn about that particular book. And the same really applies for the articles as well. In a version that I edited out a moment ago of a search, I showed how to find subjects in an article. I'm going to show that here in just a second too. But as I look at this book, if you remember, I showed a moment ago that we can look at the description to learn a little bit more about the book itself, look at its contents and things. Well, if we do that, we will also see the subjects under which this book is cataloged. Now, that's important because that essentially gives me a window into how this book is sort of referenced within the system. So now I know that I can throw in some of these other terms to start zooming into what it is that I'm looking for specifically. And more to the point, if I go to radicalism or right-wing extremists, United States, for example, it's going to add it as a subject search. So now I'm looking at all 1,000 materials cataloged with this term within our system, and now I can do another term here. If I do, for example, now we're getting a little bit closer to where we were going, right? So this helps bring us back into our search and play around with the results that we get. Okay, one other place that's important to show is Anthrosource. This is one of our other databases for anthropology, along with anthropological literature, as we looked at earlier. Anthrosource is the Society of American Anthropologists, or American Anthropological Association, rather, journals. So these are important journals. And same applies with anthropological literature. When we put in our term, like if I put in online communities here, I'm now searching again within anthropology, so I'm kind of within, with relation and within the context of anthropology. So that means that what I'm finding are going to be more sort of methodologically aligned to what it is that I'm working on, which is important. So ethnographies and things like this. If I'm just looking for sort of those subject terms and things, fortunately, the Anthrosource isn't particularly good at a lot of the metadata parts. But if I look at something like this article here, if I do a search, and this is back to anthropological literature, and I look at something like this article here, again, I can see sort of its organizational structure. This doesn't help me a whole lot, so it really varies depending on the quality of the journal, things like that. But this kind of just gives me a way to find other things to look at. Excavating Second Life, for example, here. This might be interesting for our sense of communities and all of this. Again, kind of rough there in terms of this. Now, if I actually go to the article, there's a higher chance that the keywords that the author has come up with is going to be a lot. Here we go. See, community cyber archaeology. That's an interesting one, and that's going to virtual settlements. So these might be some interesting things. Heritage kind of strikes me as interesting there too. So in reading this, I might understand a little bit more about the nature of online communities and things like this. This would be probably an older article, not terribly recent. Second Life isn't terribly relevant, but it might give some indication of some of these things. And more importantly, I think, than actually even some of the things that it finds, although it might have some very interesting aspects to look at, but of course their bibliography and understanding some of these issues with here's issue community and so on and so forth. This is kind of gold for your research. So the idea now is that I would take and move that back into my research cycle and use some of these terms that I'm learning and back into my first search, right? So now I'm going back orienting what it is that I hope to find with some of these new terms and adding to it. I hope that's helpful. I hope some of the work through of how to kind of, think about your research topic in a more holistic way, and that the library is better used if you kind of chunk the research a little bit into smaller pieces that you're then able to kind of dig back through and piece together as you go. I hope that's clear and it makes sense. It's a little hard to do these things asynchronously when I don't have the feedback of somebody nodding or shaking their head saying they don't get it. So if this is not clear, anything, please let me know. Again, my email is jsly@umd.edu. I'm happy to work through this more sort of slowly, carefully, or pointedly. If you are having trouble with your specific research, please let me know, and I'm happy to help. With that, I hope you have a good semester, and I hope to see you all soon.